Well, it is a blessing for me to be able to be here. I'm really excited to be here. And I want to talk about a subject that's really near and dear to my heart about loving God. I think it's the most important thing you and I will ever do. And it's kind of a passion for mine, and I'll kind of explain that why. And, you know, it comes back to the verse that the Pharisee was asking Jesus, you know, what is the greatest, commandment in the book? And he said, to love the Lord your heart with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. So God tells us this is the most important thing. So I want to tell you a little bit about my journey trying to get around this verse, about trying to love God with all our heart, because that's a hard thing to think about, all my heart, all my soul. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. I grew up in a really great home, loving parents, Christian home. God was important to me through high school. I did not go to CIU. I went to Washington Lee University, and we did not worship Jesus there like you guys are doing. I kind of got far from God for about 6 years or so. Was not walking with the Lord. Came back home, went to work in our family business. My grandfather started the business. And we hired a man when I was about age 24 from outside the company to come in and be our head of operations, and 2 years later, our president. And I worked directly for him. His name was Paul Taylor, and he was just a strong evangelical Southern Baptist. He loved God with all his heart. He just, just amazingly knew the Scripture, and he was so good at talking about it, never made anybody feel uncomfortable. And I was under his, working for him for 3 years, and God used him really to draw me to God. And so at age 28, I either became a born-again Christian or I recommitted. I'm not really sure which happened there. I don't really care at this point. If I'd died at 25, it might have made a difference, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. Usually I'll say I became a Christian at age 28, but I'm not sure if I didn't just come back to where I should have been. But at any rate, so I started reading the Bible then, nothing big, 3 or 4 days a week, a chapter a day. But I was doing it every week, started at age 28. I got really engaged in my church. I did about everything you could do in my church between the age of 28 and 40. And so I'm 65 now. So at that time, I would have thought this loving God thing I was doing okay in. And then what happened, I went to a church service, and a sermon kind of rocked my world. I want to tell you about that sermon. My church had 3 services at the time, 9, 10, 15, 11:30. I'd never been to the 9 o'clock service, ever, before or since until this Sunday. I don't know why I went, but I went to the 9 o'clock service. There was a preacher there, a guest preacher named Adrian Dupre. Some of you may know him. Any of you know Adrian? He's an evangelist. He's a graduate of CIU. He's on the board of directors of CIU. How many of you know him? Okay, good. Well, he was preaching. I didn't know him. And how many of you have heard the 4-chair sermon? Okay, well, that's the sermon that God laid on me at age 41. And so I'll try to be real brief because Adrian does this about 45 minutes on a good day, 55 minutes on a bad day. But he'd have 4 metal chairs out here, and he'd say, every one of you is in one of these 4 chairs. And chair number 1 is somebody who's growing in love with God. You can be a brand new Christian, you can be a 30-year Christian, doesn't matter. If you're growing in love with God, you're chair 1. Chair 2, you're saved. You had a heart belief for God, as it says in Romans chapter 10. Your name is written in the book of life. But chair 2 has gotten stale. They've gotten complacent. There's not much fruit in their life. There's not much rewards being earned, but they're saved, but they're just kind of there. Chair 3 is somebody who thinks they're in chair 2, but they never really made a heart belief, like Romans chapter 10 talks about. It's just head assent. And they think they're in chair 2. They think they both go to church. They both teach Sunday school. They both don't beat their wives. One's going to heaven, one's not. That's chair 3. And then chair 4 is atheist, agnostic, etc. And he goes on to just talk about, many of you have heard it by your hands. We need to be in chair 1 because chair 1's where the joy is. Chair 1 is where the fruit is. Chair 1's where is pleasing God. Chair 1 is where you're earning heavenly rewards. Not that that's the goal, but it sure is nice to, God tells us about them. He wants us to earn them. He said, but chair 2, and he talks really about some of the bad things about chair 2. He says, first of all, if you're in chair 2, how do you know you're not in chair 3? Because chair 3 thinks they're in chair 2. And when you're in chair 2 or chair 3, you do not feel the growing presence of God in your life. Because you're not connected, you're not growing, you're not making an effort to get to know Him better. Chair 1 people, they're sure of their salvation because they feel the growing presence and power of God in their life. Chair 2 and 3, how do you know? And then the other thing he said about it was chair 2, he says chair 4 people look at chair 2 people and say, why do I want to be a Christian? You know, there's nothing special about them. There's no joy in their life. They talk bad about their spouse. There's nothing special about them. It's only chair 1 people. Do you think about how you came to Christ? I guarantee you there's a chair 1 person somewhere in that story. It is for me. His name was Paul Taylor at work. So anyway, but as I was listening to that sermon, it really just rocked me because I was sitting there and I knew that there was too much of myself at the time in chair 2. And here I am, been following God for 12 years as a born-again believer. Been doing I was doing everything in the church. And I'm sitting here realizing that, that there's too much of me in chair 2. Now, there were times I was in chair 1. I think you can kind of slide back and forth. But I knew in my heart of hearts that I was in chair 2 way too much. It broke me. I sat through the 10:15 service. I sat through the 11:30 service. I really did. And God, for some reason, got me to the 9 o'clock service. I gave out over 300 cassettes of that tape. Now, I know some of you going, what's a cassette? That's a little thing we used to, say. But anyway, I literally gave out over 300 cassettes. Anybody I said, you got to listen to the sermon. It's the best sermon I've ever heard. And I changed my personal mission statement. I had a personal, I'm a big believer in mission statements for organizations like CIU, but also for personal. I'd had one for 8 years at the time. And I changed my mission statement after that sermon. And my personal mission today is this. I want to know and love God more today than I did yesterday. And then I got stuff after that. It's about a page and a half. But that's my mission. I want to know and love God more today than yesterday. It's just another way of saying I want to be in first chair. That's right. I want to grow in love with God. I want to know Him and love Him more. And so I want to tell you about what's happened since that day, when I was 41 years of age to age 65. 4 things I've learned is I've tried to live out that growing in love with God kind of thing. Number 1, here's the first thing I learned. It hit me. Self-evaluation is needed. If this is the greatest commandment, and we know it is, Jesus said it was, we need to evaluate how we're doing at it. I had never done that before until Adrian goes, 4 chairs, which one are you in? He made me evaluate. The sermon made me evaluate. And it just hit me. We've got to evaluate that. And it's not just one time. We've got to evaluate constantly throughout our lives. How am I doing? There's a verse that says in 2 Corinthians, it says, examine yourselves to see whether you're of the faith. Don't you know that Christ Jesus is in you? Well, I want to tweak that just a little bit for my little message here today. Examine yourself to see if you're growing in love with God. Don't you know that Christ Jesus is in you? And it's so important. If I had not have been forced to evaluate, I may be in chair 2 right now too much of the time. But I had to evaluate. That's the first thing. Self-evaluation is needed, and I think it's continually. Number 2, I've learned that you can always go deeper, and deeper is always better. The reason I say you can always go deeper, you think of loving God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your mind, all of your strength. That's perfection to me. All of it? All of your mind? I don't know that I'm ever going to get there this side of heaven. I think I will in heaven when I have Christ's character. My personality, but His character. But I don't know that I'm ever, so I could always go deeper. I don't think, we got to be careful to think, well, I've arrived. I've got this loving God thing down. And deeper is always better. And I know there's people in this room that are probably loving God more than I ever will. I can only imagine some of the professors. I don't know if we've got any professors in here or not. I can only imagine how much they love God. They're committing their life to this and could probably make more money elsewhere, but they're committed to pouring into these students so the students can impact the world. I can only imagine how much they love God. But my message to them would be, you can go deeper, and they know that. It wouldn't be a shock, but they can go deeper, and it will be better. And anyway, to me, that was an important thing. I want to evaluate how I'm doing because I know I can go deeper. And then the third thing, I learned why it's important to love God with all our heart. Now I want you to think about that. See, I hear messages about loving God. I really don't know that I've ever heard anybody talk about it from the pulpit, why we should love God. Why did God create us and say, it's all about me, worship me, love me? I mean, many of you probably don't have children yet, probably some of you do, but is that what you're going to do when you raise your children? Are you going to say, worship me, praise me, it's all about me, love me. You just got to love me with everything you got. I'm your parent. Is God that needy? Is that insecure? And of course we know that's not the case. What God knows is that creating me to love Him and to grow in my love for Him is what is the absolute best thing for me. You think about it. He knows that apart from Him, I'm capable of some very bad things. He knows that apart from Him, I am a very self-centered person. And it's only through, I like to say it this way. When I'm in chair number 2, I have God in me, right? Christ is in me. I'm a believer. My name is written in the book of life. But you really don't see Him coming out in me in chair 2. What you see is me. That's what you see. When I'm in chair 1 and I'm growing in love with God, you start to see Christ come out in me. And so if I want to be the best husband, if I want to be the best father, if I want to be the best friend, if I want to be the best son, if I want to be the best boss, if I want to be the best employee, if I want to be the best version of myself, then I need to love God. And the more I love Him, the better I'm going to be. And God knows that. And that's why He says, this is the greatest commandment. Love me with all your heart. I'll show you the abundant life. I'll show you no regrets. A life of no regrets. I'll show you love, all the fruit of the Spirit. And so for me, I don't know, this may not be that big of a deal to you, but for me, I always want to know the why of things. Why should I love God with all my heart? Hey, not that I have to know why. I should be motivated to love God just because He's God and He's my Creator. But I think it also helps me be motivated even more when I know He wants me to love Him because He wants what's best for me. And to come to that understanding intellectually that I want to be a good husband. I do. I want to be a good father. Don't you want to be a good whatever? A good preacher, a good missionary, a good wife, a good mother? Well, if you do, then I want to say the best way I can do that is by loving God. And that just motivates me more. And I love that about God. He wants what's best for us. And then number 4, I learned how I can grow deeper in love with God. So do you ever feel like you don't love God as much as you'd like to sometimes? Can we be honest? We can't. He's an invisible God, so it's not as easy to to go have lunch with and that kind of things. And at one point in time I was thinking, I really love what God did for me on the cross. I really love that. But I want to love Him more. And there's a difference, isn't it? Than loving what He did for me and loving Him. And so I found there's a 2-step. You can't just say, okay, I want to love Him more and flip a light switch and go, I love Him more. And it doesn't work for your spouse either. You can't just say, well, I really want to love my wife more. Okay, I love her more. It's not how it works. But there's 2 steps, I believe, of how, if you want to love God more, what I've learned in my life with my experience has worked for me, is there's 2 steps to loving God more. Step number 1 is this. You've got a desire in your heart to want to grow in love with Him. There has to be a heart thing. I'll say that, but you've got to want in your heart. I'll use an analogy of an alcoholic. If somebody has a drinking problem and they want to get better, the first thing that's got to happen is they've got to acknowledge deep down that I have a problem and I want to do something about it. And that's what happened to me at 9 o'clock service in 2001 when I was listening to the 4-chair sermon. It hit my heart. And I said, I'm done. I don't want to live in chair 2 all the time. I want to be in chair 1. And it happened in my heart. Okay? And then the second step is simply this. You must commit out of desire the time and energy to get to know him better. There's a verse, actually, it's my favorite verse that outlines these 2 steps. It's Psalms 27:8. And here's how it goes. My heart says of you, seek your face. That's step 1. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Step number 2. That's my favorite verse. And so, the thing about it is, you got to commit time and energy. Becoming a Christian, we know this. I'm telling you nothing you don't know. Becoming a Christian takes no work, right? We got to be sure we understand that, right? That we can't earn our way. We just receive the gift. But once we become a Christian, until the day we die or Christ returns, there's that process in there. Church calls it sanctification. Sometimes I call it becoming best friends with God, learning to love Jesus more, becoming more Christ-like. You can describe it, but that process right there, we all know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. That requires work. 2 Peter is very clear. Make every effort. And folks, just like becoming a best friend with somebody that's sitting beside you or somebody back home, it requires effort. It requires work. It requires sacrifice. It requires serving the other person. And it's no different with Jesus. So I want to talk about 4 things, another group of 4 things, as I finish this out, about how I got 4 things that helped me get to know him more and love him more. And these won't surprise you, but I want to take you through my history and my experience. The first one was love the love letter. So what happened is, after that 4-chair sermon, I went up to Adrian afterwards. Keep in mind, I didn't know him. I introduced myself to him. I said, I just sat through 3 of your services. I found out he's teaching a Bible study in my neighborhood on Thursday mornings at 7 o'clock in the morning. I think God was really there to work on me. So I started going to his Bible studies for years. And the first one I went to, I never will forget it. He said this. He said, this Bible is love letters written from God to you, and you got to treat it that way. You got to treat it with respect. And when he said that, it registered with me. And the reason it registered with me is because my wife and I, we actually wrote little love notes when we were dating in 1986. Let me tell you how that happened. I'm in the trucking business. She worked in our trucking business in Greenville, South Carolina. We have truck mail between our service centers. And so she would write a little love note. She'd put it in the envelope. She'd put a bag of M&Ms in it. And she'd write it personal and confidential. And she'd send it to me. And I'd get the little love note, and I'd write her one back. And I kept some of those, by the way. And you'll mind if I read a little bit from it? You okay with that? It's kind of nauseating. I'm going to warn you, okay? But this was 1986. My wife's name is Pat. I'm just going to read a little paragraph or 2. Some I can't read to you. I can't even begin to tell you how happy I am with my life with you. Ever since the first time we were together, I knew you were the right person for me. I have never doubted that either. Skip a paragraph. This last couple of weeks have been great. I feel even closer to you than ever. I never knew that love could grow for someone like it does for you. How about that, huh? I fall deeper and deeper in love with you every week. And now everybody wants to say, right? It's pretty bad. But I tell you, this was pretty special to me in 1986. I kept it. Here we are 40 years later. I'm reading it to you. I got more. I'm not going to read any more, though. Don't worry. But let me ask you a question. Let's say that I was talking to my wife that night on the phone, on our landline, and didn't have cell phones. And she says, did you get my note? And I say, I did. But I was so busy. And you just won't believe the day I've had. I ate the M&Ms, but I hadn't. I'll read it tomorrow. How you think that'd gone over? Ladies, how you think that'd gone over? Sometimes I wonder. Now, this won't be as good an example for you guys because you're here at a Bible college. I mean, you guys love love letters. You're here to love letters. But there's so many Christians who do not read the Bible. And I wonder sometimes, what would God feel about how we're treating his love letters? God, I'm just so busy. I don't have 5 minutes today to read one chapter before I get going to my day today here at CIU or go to work or whatever. So we got to love the love letters. But hearing Adrian say that really helped me. Let me tell you why. Because I had been reading the Bible for 12 years at this point. I made a point to tell you that earlier. 3 to 4 days a week, nothing major. But let me tell you how I looked at it. This to me was more of a textbook to read about God. This was something that I was checking off my to-do list too oftentimes. And Adrian's like, no. God is speaking to you, and you got to read it carefully. You got to read it slowly. You need to underline what he says. And everything you underline are things that he said to you, and these are conversations that you've had, and it just really changed my mindset about how I viewed looking at the Bible. I had a fire in my house in 2016. True story. I took one thing out of my house. This book. This book's been recovered. It looks kind of new, but it's because it's been recovered. And these are precious love letters. And we know this. Like I said, I'm speaking to the choir here. I know that. I realize that. But the Bible is the number one way God reveals himself to us. He can reveal himself in many ways. Song, preaching, people, nature. But this is the number one way. It will never be the husband, the wife, the mother, the father, the friend, the employee that we can be if we don't learn to love the love letters. You can go to heaven and never open the Bible. We all know that. But you'll never be what we can be. If we want to know God more and love him more, we've got to love the love letters. And again, I wish I'd have gone to CIU and I'd be further ahead than I am now. Number 2, my prayer life stunk at age 41. I've been a born-again Christian for 12, 13 years. Man, my prayer life stunk. I was reading the Bible, I told you that, but I really wasn't connecting that to prayer. I was just reading the chapter, that was done. I was praying at night, my mind would wander, praying too much about myself, couldn't keep track, And so at the same time that Adrian came into my life, it's really weird, Bill Jones came to my life about 6 months later. And Bill invited me to start get into Bible studies, and that's when I first got connected with Bill Jones. But Bill also was meeting with me once every 2 weeks, personally, one-on-one, and saying, how can I help you spiritually? And I said, help me to pray. My prayer life stinks. And so he helped me to pray. And I don't want to get in too much into what he taught me, although I'll cover some of that. But my point I'm really trying to make is, I don't know if some of you feel like your prayer life is kind of, not what you want it to be. Join the crowd. Everybody I talk to, I think prayer life has to be learned and worked upon and improved, and we have to make every effort. This is one of those things we got to work at. We don't work at our salvation, but we work at our prayer life. We try things, and what he taught me, he said, okay, let's talk about a time alone with God. Most people like to do it in the morning. You don't have to, but pick a place, pick a time, so you do it at the same time. He said, now, we're going to meet with God. Who should talk first? Well, God should talk first. Okay, we're going to start with Scripture. Kind of what Adrian was saying. We're going to start with Scripture, and we're going to read it carefully, and we're going to read it slowly. We're going to mark what he says, and then we're going to pray it back to him. Like, pray it back to him? I know that's old school to you, but what do you mean? Well, if you underline love your neighbor as yourself, you say, God, thank you for reminding me of that. Just yesterday, I got frustrated with the Lizard's Thicket waitress because she didn't keep my glass filled. Help me to be just, God, more loving everywhere. That's praying it back to him. And so this Bible's got conversations, things that he's saying to me and things I'm saying back to him. And I was like, wow, that makes it real. We're having a meeting. I'm having a meeting with God. I'm not reading a textbook about God. And then when we get through with that, then let's praise and thank him. Thank you for the good night's sleep I had last night, Lord. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to a bunch of young people who are passionate for God. Thank you for my wife. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for being the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And then I can go into my request. And he encouraged me to write them down. Write down some things that you want to pray about over time for your wife. So I can pick out one thing on that list today. I don't have to pick out 4, just one. And one thing for my daughter. Make a list of people that are sick and I want to pray for. That way my mind doesn't wander. He just helped me get a structure, and I was so thankful. Praying really kind of went from something I felt like I should do but didn't enjoy to something I wanted to do and did enjoy. And I'm still working on it. I'm now for a long time I read nothing but the Bible. Now I'm reading the Bible, and I'm also interjecting some devotional material, reading on top. I'm just trying to keep it fresh, doing different things. You got to work at it. You want to know and love God more, you got to work on developing your prayer life. Another thing I'm really working on right now, and I don't want to go too long here, but is the 1 Thessalonians 5:17. Pray without fill in the blank. Pray without ceasing. How do I stay in continuous conversation with God? Now, I don't do that good at it, but I'm working at it. You know, flash prayers. I'll leave. I'll go back to work today, and I walk in, and my assistant goes, "Tobin, you got an upset customer. Man, he ain't talking to nobody but you. You got to call him back. Lord, please help me to handle this right. Please help me not to get defensive. Let me be a light in this conversation." Flash prayer. God. And then I go to this afternoon, maybe I'm not, but just say I was going to the doctor, and I got my blood report back, and he says, "Your blood report's good. Lord, thank you for that blessing." Flash prayer to God. And I lay down at night. I've had my time alone in the morning, but I want more than that. He doesn't just want one appointment. I want to tell him good night. Stay in a continuous conversation with God. And that's something I'm really, really working on now. But here's the point, guys, that I've learned. We got to continually work on our prayer life. And we can get better, and it can be enjoyable, and it can be wonderful. But it's helped me love God more. The third thing I want to cover real quickly is something that's kind of related to that. It's called Claim the Commute, something I started 20 years ago. And it relates to the 1 Thessalonians 5:17. It was this. I said, I drive 25 minutes a day to work. I drive 25 minutes a day home from work. I used to listen to sports talk radio. There's nothing wrong with sports talk radio, right? There's nothing evil about it. But I changed 20 years ago to listening to Christian music or a Christian podcast. Now, what does that do for me? It helps me have continuous conversation with God. It helps me. That's another 25 minutes a day that I've got Jesus coming in my ears. 25 minutes going home, Jesus in my ears. It helps me stay connected. I want to stay connected because the more I stay connected, the more I know Him and the more I love Him. And the more I love Him, the better off I am, the better person I am. And then the last thing was small groups. I'm embarrassed to tell you, I never was really in a small group until age 41. Now, I was big into Sunday school. I taught Sunday school, young youth, adults. So I was in that, but I never was in a small group in the middle of the week with other men or even couples or whatever until I was age 41. Adrian got me in his, and Bill Jones got me in his, and I was off to the races. And man, I was amazed. I know you guys, you're laughing at me going, "You didn't get in a small group at age 41? Well, it is what it is, right? But I was amazed at how much the small groups, iron sharpening iron, helped me to know and love God more. And those small groups helped me get to know and love God in a way that my time alone with God didn't do. But make no mistake about it, my time alone with God did something to help me know and love God that my small groups don't do. And what I learned is all these things help. Listening to Christian music helps. All that, keeping Jesus in my mind and in my thoughts. And so really, loving God, it's a journey. We never arrive. It's the most important thing we'll do. But I just want to summarize the 4 points again. The self-evaluation is needed. Please, if there's anything else, I think that's important, but we just constantly evaluate. This is the most important commandment. Jesus tells us that. It deserves a self-evaluation. Number 2, I can always go deeper. I want to remind myself, I can always go deeper, and deeper is better, so I need to chase after it. And number 3, why? Why? The reason God did that is because it's what's best for me. It's how I can be the best version of myself. There's a great song, "A Little More Like Jesus, A Little Less Like Me," right? I love that song. And then number 4, I learned how I can grow in love with God. My heart says if you seek your face, Lord, I will seek. And so, I got a long way to go. That's not false humility. I know it in terms of loving God, but I also know I've come a long way since age 41. And I hope 10 years from now I can see that I've come further. But the most exciting thing about loving God, and I'm wrapping up here, the most exciting thing about loving God is knowing that the Jesus Christ that's living in you will come out more in you the more you love Him. When people see you, they're going to see Jesus. And when you influence things, you're going to have the influence of Jesus. When you're having conversations, when you're dealing with hard things, when you're dealing, Jesus is going to come out in you. And that's where we start to experience more and more of the love, the joy, the peace, the patience, the kindness, the goodness, the faithfulness, the gentleness, and the self-control. Those things don't come out in chair 2 much. They come out in chair 1. And thank you very much for listening to me. I'm proud of you guys for being here. I'm proud of what y'all are going to do in the world when you leave. That's why we serve on the board, us board members. I just rolled off, because we know what you're going to do. We know you're going to change the world with the message of Christ. And so thank you for listening to me.